Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into a story that grabbed a lot of headlines recently.
Yeah, that one with the video is pretty intense.
Exactly. A moment caught on camera that just, exploded online,
Mm.
sparked a huge conversation across the country.
hmm
So our mission here is to unpack that specific event using the sources we have to figure out not just the what, but the why. Why did it resonate so deeply? What issues did it, bring to the surface?
It's a fascinating case study, really, how one interaction seems almost small on the face of it can suddenly shine a light on these bigger societal things,
hmm
especially around, service, respect, symbols of honor.
Absolutely. And at the heart of it, you've got this courtroom scene. A decorated veteran wearing his uniform and a judge. Civil matter, nothing huge.
Right.
But wow, the sources show it was anything but simple. It kicked off this wave of outrage, had real consequences.
We're looking at James Foster, the veteran, wearing his uniform, his Silver Star, and Judge Ronald Metz. And the sources do describe the judge as having, let's say, a very rigid approach.
Yeah, rigid comes up a lot, which, as we'll see, kind of set the stage.
Definitely a key factor.
So you have this setup, routine court case, a veteran there for a zoning thing, right? Super mundane.
Yeah, property dispute with a developer, I think.
Right. And then this judge with a specific reputation,
Yeah.
and bam, this flashpoint. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? About deference, respect, where honor actually lies sometimes.
And how quickly it just took off. Once that video hit the internet, the reaction was, well, the sources say it was immediate and massive. It tapped into something way bigger than just those two people in that room.
For sure. So digging into these sources, the big questions are, what exactly happened in that exchange? How did it go from one courtroom moment to this national thing? And maybe most importantly, what does it tell us about how we as a society view honor, military service, and respect, especially within our institutions? Let's dive in.
Okay, let's start with James Foster. The sources paint a pretty clear picture. 62 years old and a really long military career, 28 years in the Army.
Wow, 28 years.
Yeah. Including serious combat time, 3 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and crucially, he's a Silver Star recipient.
Which is a major decoration for gallantry, right?
Exactly. Gallantry in action against an enemy, not handed out lightly.
No kidding. And the sources say he'd pretty much returned to a quiet civilian life, not someone looking for the spotlight.
That seems to be the case. Which makes his reason for being in court even more, well, ordinary. Just this civil case about a zoning issue. His property versus a local developer.
So not some big dramatic trial.
Not at all.
Okay, so why the uniform then?
Right.
That's a key point. The sources suggest it wasn't for spectacle.
Right. It sounds like for him, the uniform still meant something fundamental. Discipline, dignity, truth, core values.
Yeah.
And that Silver Star pinned on his chest. The reports describe it almost as a quiet, personal thing. A reminder of lives saved, maybe?
A very personal symbol then. It says a lot about his connection to his service.
It really does. Now, contrast that with Judge Ronald Metz. The sources keep mentioning this rigid demeanor, almost a quiet contempt, some descriptions say, for anything he saw as unnecessary display.
So a real clash of perspectives right there.
You can see it coming, can't you? Like putting flint and steel together in that courtroom.
And the spark hits the moment James stands up to speak. The sources are pretty specific about the judge's reaction. What did he say?
Well, according to the reports, the judge cut him off almost immediately, just ordered him, remove that medal. You're not in combat now.
Wow. Just like that.
Pretty much. And when James, understandably, sort of paused and asked if he was violating some rule or protocol.
Which seems like a fair question.
Totally. But the judge's response, the transcriptions say, it came with this sort of dismissive smirk. This isn't a parade, sir.
This isn't a parade. Oof. That hits hard.
Yeah. And he didn't stop there. The sources show he just kept pushing, cold tone, repeating the demand. Sir, that medal, you're not in uniformed service now. You're in my court.
Doubling down.
And then really driving it home, this is my courtroom, and I say remove it now. Really laying down the authority.
That feels incredibly confrontational for a judge in that situation.
It was perceived as deeply disrespectful, clearly. The sources say James looked unsure at first, blinked, tried again, respectfully, to ask about the rules. But the judge wasn't having it.
And when pressed like that?
James just looked him straight in the eye. And this is the moment everyone remembers, the quote that went everywhere.
What did he say?
According to the sources, verbatim, "Sir, I have faced down enemies with more honor than what you've just shown me."
Whoa. Delivered quietly, the reports say.
Yeah, apparently not shouted. But the impact coming from him? In uniform with that medal, it must have been huge in that room. Cut right through the tension.
You can imagine what happened immediately after he said that.
Well, the sources describe this kind of low murmur going through the courtroom, people looking at each other.
Yeah.
And crucially, someone in the gallery realized what was happening and started recording it on their phone.
Ah, the phone recording. That's the piece that changes everything.
Exactly. A short clip, less than a minute, really focusing on that key exchange. The judge's order, James's pause, his reply. Uploaded that afternoon.
And then?
Boom. The speed was incredible. Reports say within 24 hours it had something like 1.2 million views.
1.2 million overnight for a courtroom clip.
Yep. It wasn't just views, it was shares. People were sharing it like crazy. The sources talk about this wave of reaction, especially from veterans groups, military folks, Gold Star families. They were furious.
I can imagine. Must have felt like a direct insult to the uniform, to the service itself.
That's exactly how the sources described the reaction. They felt it disrespected, not just Foster, but everything the uniform and medal stand for. Then you had the hashtags, hashtag dishonor with uniform, hashtag medalgate,
Right, those were trending everywhere.
all over social media. And then TV news picked it up. National commentators were talking about it. It just snowballed.
So the pressure on Judge Matz must have become immense, really fast.
Unbelievably fast. By midweek, the state's Judicial Oversight Board, they reportedly got over 5,000 formal complaints just in 2 days.
5,000, that's staggering. Shows how deep the anger went.
Definitely not typical. And it wasn't just online. Sources mentioned peaceful protests starting up outside the courthouse, veterans, some in full uniform, standing silently.
A powerful image.
Yeah, some holding photos of fallen service members. A very quiet, very dignified counterstatement to what happened inside.
And what about James Foster during all this, the veteran himself?
That's one of the interesting parts the sources highlight. He stayed completely quiet. No interviews, no TV appearances, nothing.
Huh. Why do you think?
The material suggests his silence actually added weight to his original statement and made it seem less about him, less about ego, and more about the principle. Dignity over drama.
That makes sense. It reinforces the idea that his stand wasn't for attention.
Exactly. It was about something fundamental. And while all this public reaction was happening, the media started digging, which leads to the next chapter.
Right, because it didn't stop with just the viral moment. What did the reporters uncover?
They found what the sources call a troubling pattern. It wasn't just a one-off bad moment for Judge Matz. Looking back over years,
Uh-oh.
yeah, reports and records started surfacing that suggested a history of bias, or at least a real lack of empathy, towards military personnel in his courtroom.
So this wasn't isolated. Are there specifics mentioned?
Yes, the sources cite a few examples, things like denying veterans the use of their service dogs in court,
Seriously?
apparently, and allegedly mocking PTSD claims during, family court cases. Really sensitive stuff.
Wow. Okay, that paints a very different picture.
It does. They pulled up old court transcripts. Complaints that maybe hadn't gotten much attention before were suddenly back in the spotlight. It shifted the whole story.
So it went from viral incident to potentially a full-blown judicial scandal, questioning his fitness, basically.
Exactly. It suggested this wasn't just a mistake, but maybe part of a larger issue with how he operated, at least concerning veterans.
And James Foster, he didn't just let the media handle it, right? He took formal steps.
He did. The sources state he filed a formal complaint himself.
And he wasn't alone in that.
Not at all. The reports mention massive support. Dozens of service organizations, veteran advocacy groups, even the Department of Veterans Affairs backed him up publicly.
That shows how seriously the veteran community took this.
Absolutely. It validated his stand for many. And the state had to react. The public pressure, the complaint. Sources say they convened an emergency hearing pretty quickly. The judicial panel reviewed Judge Matt's conduct.
Must have been quite the hearing.
The descriptions are powerful. It wasn't just Foster testifying. Other veterans, families came forward, people who, according to the sources, had faced similar disrespect in his court over the years but maybe hadn't spoken out before.
Giving voice to those older incidents.
Exactly. And one story the sources really highlight: a Marine widow.
Oh.
She testified, tearfully apparently, that during a custody hearing, the judge had ordered her to remove her husband's folded burial flag from her lap. Oh my God, the burial flag.
Yeah. That specific detail, it just landed with incredible weight, according to the reports. It showed the nature of the disrespect wasn't abstract. It was aimed right at these incredibly powerful symbols.
That's heartbreaking and
Yeah.
just wrong.
The cumulative effect of that testimony, the viral video evidence, the transcripts showing the pattern, The sources say the case against him became overwhelming.
So what was the panel's decision?
It was swift and decisive. They didn't just recommend discipline. The reports state they demanded his immediate removal from the bench.
Immediate removal, not just suspension.
Suspended indefinitely within a week pending the final removal process. Essentially, his career on the bench was over.
In his response, did he apologize?
He issued a statement, the sources say, but crucially, no apology. Not to James Foster, not to the military community.
That probably didn't help his image.
Likely not. His reputation, once maybe just seen as stern, was now, according to the reports, defined by this whole affair. Arrogance, disrespect, public disgrace. A complete reversal. And what about James Foster? What happened with him?
Well, the narrative kind of comes full circle. The sources say he got a call from the governor.
Okay.
And later that week, a public ceremony at the state capitol. Big crowd, applause. He was awarded a Medal of Civic Honor.
Civic honor, not military.
Right. The sources emphasize that. It wasn't for his past military service, but for his actions in that courtroom, for his dignity, his courage as a citizen facing down that injustice.
Recognizing the civilian act of standing firm.
Exactly. Acknowledging that his stand was about respect, about honor in a broader sense. And the sources keep coming back to his perspective. He never wanted revenge. He just wanted respect for the uniform, for what it represents.
It really feels like this whole thing became about much more than just one judge and one veteran.
It really did. The sources suggest it exposed these quieter, everyday ways veterans can feel dismissed or misunderstood once they're out of uniform. It made people ask, does the respect we show on Memorial Day carry over into a random Tuesday in a courtroom?
A really important question. And did anything concrete change because of this, systemically?
Yes, actually. The sources point to a direct outcome. New statewide guidelines were issued. All judges in that state now have to take mandatory training on veteran sensitivity and military protocol.
That's significant. A real policy change.
A tangible step aimed at preventing this kind of thing from happening again. And through it all, James Foster became this symbol, not really of controversy, but more of composure, integrity.
Standing tall?
Quietly. Yeah. A reminder that courage isn't just about facing enemy fire. It's also about holding your ground when someone in power tries to diminish you or what you stand for.
That's a powerful thought.
And maybe the lasting message coming out of these sources is for any veteran who's felt unseen or disrespected after service. Foster showed you don't need the official power, the gavel, to stand for justice or demand respect. Sometimes, the sources suggest, it's just about refusing to bow your head.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it really boils down to how one person's quiet refusal to let their dignity be compromised, how that single act shone a light on a bigger problem, started a national conversation, and actually led to change.
Yeah, it's a striking example of individual conviction making waves, standing firm, calmly, but resolutely for what you believe is right.
And it definitely highlights the unique challenges veterans might face transitioning back, carrying that service history, and the need for that to be genuinely seen and respected.
Which leads to a really interesting thought for you, the listener, to take away from this. If authority doesn't always recognize honor, if institutions sometimes fall short, how does that earned dignity survive? How does it make itself known in everyday life?
And flowing from that, what role do you play? In your own world, your interactions. How do you ensure that quiet courage, that dignity earned through sacrifice and service, is actually seen, valued, and given the respect it deserves? Something to definitely mull over.